Hi everyone, my name is Bella. So for this assignment, I do enjoy it just because part of my job is I work with clinicians who host family therapy frequently. So when they have family therapy with my clients, I get to sit in on a lot of them. So it is nice to be able to sit there and kind of explain and kind of like show you guys what I've seen. So I know for the first segment, um, typically our first meetings with family, we sit there and we try to um, kind of lay out exactly like what our roles is. So sitting there and explaining like your role as a clinician, like what that means, what you're going to be doing with the family. Um, Typically, I'll also explain my role, but for right now, we're going to kind of focus more on clinician and family therapy. So um, we normally explain like what their goals are. So a lot of the goals are like increasing family communication, respectful communication, um, trying to get people to open up and better self-express themselves, and also working on addressing like the harder issues like remaining safe, away from self-harm, um, things like that. We also typically outline exactly what family therapy looks like how often it's going to happen, um, who has to be present, like are there times where it's just going to be the parents, is it just the kids, is it everyone all together? It also helps if you sit there and you explain what it's going to look like, that way they aren't surprised by anything um, but one thing we also do in the first session is sitting there and explaining family therapy rules. So a lot of times family therapy can get very messy and can be overwhelming. A lot of people get very emotional during family therapy. So it's important to sit there and establish those rules. So a lot of times we'll go in and we'll be like, oh, like, so these are like, we normally give at least like one or two examples of like what our rules typically are. So like one of our main rules is no interrupting, because people get heated and then they want to sit there and voice their opinion right then and there versus waiting. And so we normally say, oh, like, okay, so one of our rules is no interrupting. Do you guys have any rules that you would like to put in that everyone has to follow? And a lot of times the families would be like, yeah, like, I want people not to get mad at what I'm saying, and I want people to respect me. I don't want to get yelled at for what I said later after you guys leave, like things like that. So being able to sit there and create those rules also makes it easier later on, because you're sitting there and you're not as worried about things coming up, and you can always add more rules later on, so that like say if like a family is like very much like out of hand, like yelling or screaming, like you can sit there and go back to the rules and like kind of step in and be like, okay, like like why don't we take a break, we're gonna go back and take a few minutes, take a few deep breaths, and then we're going to go over the rules of family therapy again, and then we're going to try to start over and figure out what's going on, which kind of leads into the second segment of like how to interrupt them. So a lot of it's also sitting there and having that relationship with the family where you can like interrupt. Obviously there's respectful ways of doing it. So during one of our first sessions, we normally set like a hand signal. So like one of the clinicians I work with, if she raises her hand, that's a signal for the family to stop talking because she has something to say and she feels it's not beneficial, like what they're doing right then and there. The families are normally really good about following those rules. And if like they are having a hard time, like the clinician can sit there and step in and tell them like, okay, like right now, like everyone is feeling very vulnerable right now, why don't we all take some space? Like we normally have people go to like separate corners, or even if they're just sitting there just kind of like remaining quiet, the clinician will sit there and have them take like a couple deep breaths, and then we typically go over the family rules again and try to kind of like break down what happened and like why everyone is like so heightened in that moment. When ending a session, we normally do have a lot of homework assignments that we give parents, which is good. It gives them things to work on. So sitting there at the end of a session, we normally say like, okay, like like during the session, we went over how to better communicate, like we're not going to interrupt each other. If like Stacy expresses that she wants some space, she's going to take it in a safe area, such as like the backyard or her bedroom. Definitely safe spaces where she feels comfortable. Mom and dad feel comfortable her being there as well. And then we sit there and kind of explain what their goals are. So sitting there and telling mom, like, okay, like if Katie or Stacy or whoever it is isn't in a safe space, sitting there giving her that initial calm prompt. And then if it doesn't, sit there and give her another prompt, and if she doesn't listen, like taking her to timeout or things like that. Just kind of like going over in like great detail, kind of reminding them what it is. That way they know what they have to do for the next like couple days or week whenever they're doing it. And also typically we also check in like halfway through just to make sure that they are reminded of the goals. And then during the next session, we'll kind of go over what the goals were, whether they were successful, whether they weren't. Some families will even give charts or like worksheets to do to fill out. So like we have like behavior charts. So like if like their child is throwing a tantrum, like how often is it happening? When is it happening? Were they successful with the intervention we've given them? And it does kind of create a better environment where they can kind of be open about it. I honestly love when we do the charts for them. And normally the parents are very on board with it. Like you sit there and you just kind of explain like, oh, like here's your chart. We're just going to sit there and track like Kitty's behaviors for the week. So fill it out when you can. Like if you miss a day or a couple days, like it's okay. But we really want it as accurate as possible. And then just explain that you want it done by the next time you see them. And most of the time it's done. Sometimes there's a few errors, but for the most part, it's pretty good. All right. Thank you guys.